Many of us are living in a familiar yet deeply conflicting way, constantly trying to gain others' approval. But the more we try, the emptier we feel inside. We spend so much energy building an image of being likable, easygoing, and trouble-free that we forget who we truly are. We smile even when we're not happy. We nod in agreement even when we completely disagree inside. We stay in conversations, relationships, or situations that drain us just because we're afraid of being seen as cold or difficult. Gradually, people-pleasing becomes a reflex. We say yes without thinking, avoid conflict, and consistently put others' emotions before our own. On the outside, everything seems fine. We're liked, accepted, even praised. But inside, a quiet sense of emptiness keeps growing. It's the feeling that we're living a life that doesn't fully belong to us. The feeling that no matter how much we try, it's still not enough, not good enough, not loved enough, not enough to truly feel at ease being ourselves. The problem isn't caring about others, it's losing ourselves in exchange for their approval. When this continues, we gradually lose touch with our true desires, our genuine emotions, and our inner voice. And the irony is, no matter how hard we try, pleasing everyone is impossible. Yet the cost is very real: exhaustion, pressure, and a quiet, unnameable emptiness within ourselves. Elias is a reflection of many people in modern life. He isn't particularly outstanding, nor does he face any major difficulties. He has a stable job, a normal life, and good social relationships. In the eyes of others, Elias is likable, easygoing, and always knows how to behave appropriately. He is appreciated for his friendliness and his ability to not upset anyone. But behind that image lies a familiar way of living, always putting others before himself. Elias often agrees with other people's opinions, even when he doesn't truly share them. He chooses silence over debate, not because he lacks his own perspective, but because he fears conflict. To him, maintaining harmony is more important than expressing his true thoughts. Not only that, he constantly tries to please those around him. From small conversations to major decisions, Elias tends to ask, "What will others think?" before asking himself, "What do I really want?" He is always willing to help, willing to sacrifice his time, effort, and even his own comfort just to make others feel at ease. Over time, putting others' needs above his own becomes a habit. Elias gradually grows used to ignoring his true feelings. He no longer recognizes what he wants, what he likes, or what he needs. What's striking is that Elias doesn't believe he's doing anything wrong. On the contrary, he sees this as the right way to live, being kind, considerate, accommodating, and never causing trouble for anyone. He believes that if he treats others well enough, everything will turn out fine. But it is precisely this belief that slowly distances him from himself without him even realizing it. Elias's life continued in that steady, predictable way, until one day, something very small created a major turning point. It wasn't a dramatic event, nor a failure, just a question, simple, gentle, yet powerful enough to make him rethink everything. A stranger looked at Elias and said, "You're very good at being what others need. But what do you truly want?" At first, Elias just smiled and brushed it off. He was used to saying he was fine, that he had nothing to complain about. But this time, the question didn't fade away. It lingered quietly, yet heavily in his mind. That evening, for the first time in a long while, Elias sat down with himself. He tried to recall the last time he did something purely for himself, not for anyone else, not to please anyone. But the more he tried to remember, the more he was confronted with a truth that made him pause. He couldn't find an answer. It had been too long since he had lived for himself. If you're hearing this and feel like this story reflects your own life, consider subscribing so you don't miss more stories that help you understand yourself better, because sometimes a single shift in perspective can change everything. Back to Elias, this moment felt like a mirror placed right in front of him. He began to realize that all this time he had been living according to others' expectations, to the point that he had forgotten what he truly wanted. It's not that he had no desires, it's that he had grown used to ignoring them. The stranger's question didn't give him an answer, but it opened a door, and for the first time, Elias understood that perhaps the problem wasn't that his life was lacking something, but that he had never truly listened to himself. After that seemingly simple question, Elias began to look at himself in a completely different way, no longer with the surface-level awareness he once had, but with genuine observation, slower, deeper, and more honest. He started noticing the small actions in his daily life. At the market, when a seller offered an unreasonable price, he would still nod in agreement, even though it didn't feel right to him. In social gatherings, he patiently listened to stories he wasn't interested in, simply because he feared that showing indifference might offend others. When an acquaintance asked for help, Elias would say yes almost immediately, even before they finished speaking, not because he was always available, but because he wasn't used to saying no. To him, saying no felt almost the same as disappointing someone. The more he observed, the more he noticed a pattern repeating itself. He always gave in. He always agreed. He was always there when others needed him. On the surface, these seemed like good qualities, but deep inside, Elias began to feel a kind of emptiness that was hard to describe. He realized that he could be everywhere for everyone, yet not truly present in his own life. He knew what others wanted, needed, and expected from him, but when he turned inward, he had no answers. He didn't know what he liked, what he wanted, or what truly gave his life meaning. It felt like living a life where he was a participant, but not the one making the choices. Everything kept moving, everything continued, but something essential was missing: a connection with himself. And that's when Elias understood the problem wasn't that he hadn't tried hard enough. It was that he had spent so much time becoming what others needed that he had forgotten who he really was. After realizing he had lost connection with himself, Elias didn't suddenly transform overnight or make drastic changes all at once. He didn't become a completely different person in a single moment. Instead, he began with very small steps, almost unnoticeable to others, yet deeply meaningful to him. For the first time, when he heard an opinion he didn't agree with, Elias no longer smiled and nodded as he used to. He gently said, "I see it differently." No arguments, no attempt to persuade, just simple honesty. Though the sentence was ordinary, it was a huge step for him. His heart raced, and he worried about how the other person might react. But then he realized the world didn't fall apart just because he spoke the truth. He also started listening more to his body and his emotions. When he felt tired during a social gathering, he allowed himself to leave early instead of forcing himself to stay just to be polite. At first, this made him feel a bit guilty, but over time, he understood that respecting his own limits isn't selfish, it's necessary. Elias also began making time for simple things he genuinely enjoyed. He chose to take a longer route home, just because he liked the scenery. These small moments, which he once overlooked, now brought him a sense of peace he had never truly noticed before. Of course, not everyone understood these changes. Some people began to see him as different, even somewhat distant. A few stopped reaching out to him as often, because he was no longer always agreeable or constantly available. At times, this made Elias feel a little hurt, but deep down, he knew he was slowly finding his way back to himself step by step, unhurried, but real. When Elias began to change, he thought he would lose many things: approval, relationships, and the sense of belonging he had always been used to. And it's true, some people did drift away. But what he didn't expect was this: those who stayed started to see him in a completely different light. They began to respect him more, not because he had become more perfect, but because he had become more genuine. When Elias expressed his thoughts, whether in agreement or disagreement, others no longer saw it as unpleasant, but as clear and trustworthy. His conversations also changed. Instead of polite exchanges and automatic nods, he began having truly meaningful discussions. People listened to him not out of courtesy, but because they knew what he said reflected what he genuinely believed, and that gave his words far more weight than before. If you feel like you've been performing for too long just to please others, consider subscribing to explore more stories that help you live more authentically, because sometimes, even a small change can make a big difference. One of the most noticeable shifts was Elias's willingness to speak up when something felt wrong. In a meeting at work, when a decision seemed unfair to him, he no longer stayed silent. He calmly expressed his point of view, not aggressively, not in opposition, just clearly and sincerely. Something unexpected happened. Not only was he not opposed, but others also began to speak up in support of him. In the end, the decision was adjusted in a better direction. In that moment, Elias realized something important. When you live authentically, you don't just change your own life. Sometimes, you create positive change for those around you as well. From Elias's story, an important lesson gradually emerges not just for him, but for most of us. In life, many people tend to shrink themselves to make others feel comfortable. We adjust our words, emotions, and behaviors to fit different situations, different people, and different expectations. Over time, this is no longer a choice. It becomes a familiar role we unconsciously play. We learn to say what we should say instead of what we truly think. We learn to smile at the right moments and stay silent in the right places. We learn to become the version of ourselves that is easiest for others to accept. On the surface, this makes everything smoother. There's less conflict, it's easier to fit in, and it seems like we're more likable. But the cost is a growing disconnection from ourselves. When we perform for too long, we begin to forget what we truly feel and what we genuinely want. The irony is that trying so hard to be likable doesn't create real connection. People may like the version we present, but deep down, they can still sense a lack of authenticity. And that subtle, soft pretense makes relationships feel shallow, lacking real depth. On the other hand, what truly draws people in isn't perfection or constant agreeableness. It's authenticity. Someone who dares to speak honestly, express their perspective, and live in alignment with their emotions may not please everyone, but they build trust. Authenticity brings clarity. Others know who you are, what you think, and where you stand. And it's that clarity that creates a sense of security and deeper connection far more than any perfectly performed role ever could. In the end, the lesson isn't to stop caring about others, but to stop losing yourself in the process. When it comes to trust in relationships, what makes someone trustworthy isn't their ability to always be agreeable or to say yes to everything. On the contrary, those who truly earn trust are often the ones with clear perspectives, people who are willing to express their honest thoughts, even when those thoughts aren't entirely pleasing to others. They don't say yes just to please. They don't stay silent when something needs to be said, and they don't change who they are just to fit others' expectations. It's this consistency that makes them trustworthy. Others may not always agree with them, but they know that what they see is real. There's no ambiguity, no sense of putting on a performance, and that creates a strong foundation for respect and long-term connection. Such people tend to live by their internal values, the principles, beliefs, and standards they define for themselves, rather than constantly adjusting based on circumstances or others' opinions. They can be flexible, but they don't lose their core. The important thing is this: authenticity isn't something you need to search for outside yourself. It already exists within you. However, over time, we unknowingly cover it with layers, people-pleasing habits, learned reactions to avoid conflict, and choices that don't truly come from within. So becoming more authentic isn't about trying to become someone new. It's about gradually removing the layers that don't belong to you. That might mean no longer agreeing when you don't truly believe, no longer saying things that don't feel right, and starting to listen more closely to your inner voice. As those artificial layers are slowly stripped away, authenticity naturally emerges, unforced, unpretentious, yet strong enough for others to feel and trust. The most important message from this story can be summed up in a simple yet powerful idea. When you stop performing for the world, your real life truly begins. For a long time, many people live as if they're standing on a stage, constantly trying to present a version of themselves that is easy to accept and easy to like. Every action, every word is measured against how others might react. Gradually, life becomes a continuous series of performances, to the point where we forget who we really are. Living authentically isn't something grand or extreme. It doesn't mean completely changing yourself, nor does it mean being so blunt that you hurt others. Authenticity begins with small but clear choices. It's when you dare to say no when you genuinely don't want to say yes, not to resist, but to be honest with yourself. Every time you say no at the right moment, you are protecting your time, energy, and personal boundaries. It's also when you help others because you truly want to, not because you fear judgment or want to be liked. When your actions come from genuine willingness, they feel lighter and far more meaningful. More importantly, living authentically means starting to do things that truly matter to you. Not what you should do, not what others expect, but what makes you feel connected, fulfilled, and truly alive. When you stop trying to become the version the world expects, you gradually return to who you really are. And from that place, a more genuine, peaceful, and fulfilling life begins, not loud or dramatic, but deep and lasting. Change in life doesn't always come from big decisions or dramatic turning points. Sometimes, it comes from very small, quiet shifts, yet powerful enough to completely transform how you experience and live your life. When a person begins to live more authentically, they don't necessarily have to change much on the outside. Their job may remain the same, their relationships may continue, and life may still follow its familiar rhythm. But internally, everything has changed. The first thing they often notice is a sense of relief. No more constantly overthinking what to say to please others. No more forcing themselves to maintain a perfect image. Instead, there's a sense of ease in simply being who they are. Not perfect, but real. If you want to continue exploring a lighter, more authentic, and more meaningful way of living each day, consider subscribing to follow along with more stories like this. Beyond that sense of relief, relationships also begin to feel more genuine. When you stop performing, the people who stay are those who accept you for who you truly are. Conversations gain depth and real connection. You no longer have to try so hard to be understood because you are clearly expressing yourself. Another important shift is trust. When you live in alignment with your thoughts and actions, others can feel it. They know that what you say is real, and what you do carries meaning. That clarity builds trust quietly, but solidly. In the end, living authentically may not make your life louder, but it will certainly make it clearer and more complete. Not because you have more, but because you are no longer losing yourself.